Have you ever felt eyes on you when you knew you were alone? Not just that fleeting sensation, the kind that fades when you turn your head. No, I'm talking about the kind that lingers. The kind that makes your skin itch and your heartbeat quicken for no clear reason. This story comes from a woman named Rachel. She was just trying to start over. New apartment, new chapter. A quiet town where nothing much happened. The kind of place people went to heal, not to be hunted. She had no idea that something or someone was already waiting for her there. Rachel had always been a city girl. Loud traffic, paper-thin walls, and the comfort of knowing that you were never truly alone. After a 5-year relationship ended in a betrayal that shattered her confidence, she decided to get away from it all. A friend had suggested a sleepy little town about 2 hours outside the city. It had a charm, she said. Simple life, affordable rent, peace. That's what Rachel thought she needed. Peace. She found a listing online. Second floor unit in an old brick building, tucked between a laundromat and a nail salon. 2 bedrooms, modest kitchen, creaky floors. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. The first space she could truly call her own. She moved in on a Sunday. It was unusually warm for September. The landlord, a quiet man in his 60s named Mr. Abrams, handed her the keys and warned her that the place could get a little noisy sometimes. Old pipes, aging ducts, that kind of thing. Rachel nodded, signed the papers, and didn't think much of it. That first night, she unpacked in silence. No neighbors shouting through walls. No barking dogs. Just the distant hum of fluorescent lights from the shop signs outside. Around midnight, she collapsed onto her mattress with a sense of relief and exhaustion. But then, just as sleep was about to claim her, she heard it, a faint scratching sound. It came from the ceiling vent above her closet. Short, irregular bursts. Not loud, almost hesitant. She told herself it was nothing, maybe a mouse, or even just old metal expanding in the cooling air. She rolled over and eventually drifted off. The next morning, the sound was forgotten. Rachel spent the day arranging her furniture and hanging curtains. She made a pot of coffee, opened her laptop, and told herself things were going to be okay. By the end of the week, she'd settled into a routine. Morning walks, afternoon calls with friends, evenings reading on the couch with music playing softly in the background. But the scratching returned. Not every night, but often enough to feel strange. It seemed to move from vent to vent, never loud, never aggressive, but consistent, as if something or someone was gently dragging their fingers across the inside of the ductwork. She mentioned it casually to her neighbor across the hall, a man named Greg. Greg was polite, maybe in his early 40s, with a kind smile and slightly sunken eyes. When Rachel brought up the sounds, he looked up a little too quickly, then laughed. Probably mice, he said. It's an old building. You get used to it. But the way he said it, there was tension in his voice. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Rachel brushed it off at the time, but later that night, the memory of his uneasy laugh echoed louder than the sounds in her ceiling. A few days passed. That's when Rachel started losing things. It began with her phone charger. She always kept it plugged in beside her bed, but one morning it was gone. She checked her bag, the living room, even under the mattress. Nothing. Later, she found it tucked neatly into a kitchen drawer, one she hadn't opened in days. Then it was a pair of socks, then a bracelet her sister had given her, then her spare keys. Each time she found the item in a place that made no sense. Her socks inside a cereal box, the bracelet under the bathroom sink, the keys inside the fridge. She started to question herself. Was she that disorganized? Was the stress messing with her memory? She started locking her doors religiously. She checked them twice, sometimes 3 times, before bed. Still, the scratching persisted. One night, she tried to record it. She placed her phone on the shelf near the vent and let it run for hours. When she listened the next morning, the recording was mostly silence until 3:17 a.m. That's when she heard it. Something dragging, then a soft thump like weight shifting in metal. And then breathing, just a few shallow breaths. Human breaths. Rachel stared at her screen, frozen. She didn't know what to think. There was no way it could be an animal. and she hadn't imagined it. She listened to the clip over and over, each time more horrified than the last. She called the landlord. Mr. Abrams seemed unfazed. "It's probably raccoons," he said. "They get in through the roof sometimes. I'll send someone to check." But no one came. Rachel couldn't sleep. The sounds were now louder, more frequent. She started waking up with her sheets pulled partially off her. Once, she found a smear of dust on her nightstand, thin lines like fingers had trailed through. She reached out to Greg again. This time, he barely opened the door. "Have you noticed anything weird?" she asked him. His eyes darted around the hallway. He leaned in and whispered, "Keep your vents covered. Just trust me." And then he closed the door. Rachel went back inside, heart pounding. That night, she blocked the bedroom vent with a thick towel and a piece of cardboard. She sat in bed, staring at it, waiting. Nothing happened. No scratching, no breathing, just silence. She felt safe for the first time in weeks. But in the morning, the towel was on the floor. The cardboard had been peeled back. She had locked her door. She was sure of it. That day, she went to a hardware store and bought a small GoPro. She wasn't wealthy, but her peace of mind was slipping away fast. She set the camera up on a tripod, aimed directly at the vent in her bedroom, and let it run through the night. The next morning, she retrieved the footage and sat down with her coffee to review it. She fast-forwarded through the hours until something caught her eye. At 2:42 a.m., the vent cover began to shift. She paused, rewound, played it back in normal speed. A hand slid out, thin, dirty, fingernails blackened. It gripped the edge of the vent and slowly, carefully, pulled the cover aside. Then a face appeared. A man. His eyes were wide, scanning the room slowly, expression blank. His skin was pale. He moved like someone who had done this before, deliberate, patient. He crawled out halfway, dropped down, and stood beside her bed. She was visible in the frame, fast asleep, oblivious. He watched her for nearly 10 minutes. Then he turned, walked out of frame toward the hallway, and moments later, returned, climbed back into the vent, and replaced the cover. Rachel screamed. She dropped the camera, called the police with shaking hands. They arrived within 15 minutes. She showed them the footage. Officers swept the apartment and moved up to the attic. That's when they found him. The man had been living above her ceiling, between insulation and ductwork, for at least 3 weeks. A sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a small bag of her belongings were discovered near his makeshift nest. He had broken in through a maintenance hatch on the roof and had been watching her, moving through the vents at night. No one knew who he was. No ID, no explanation, just a blank stare as they led him away in cuffs. Rachel moved out the next day. She never returned to collect her things. She said she could still feel him standing there when she closed her eyes, watching. So next time you hear something in your walls, don't assume it's the wind, because someone might be watching you, too. If you're still with us after that, you're the kind of person who enjoys the shadows. So hit that subscribe button and join NeuroNightmares. We bring you the darkest real-life tales every week. Now let's dive even deeper. Some houses whisper, some creak, some groan with the weight of their history. But what do you do with a house that makes no sound at all? Not a tap, not a murmur, not even a faint hum of wind pressing against the glass. In the spring of 1996, Amanda and Derek Jennings bought their first home together. They were in their late 20s, newly married, and thrilled to find what seemed like an incredible deal, an old fixer-upper in a peaceful suburb outside Providence, Rhode Island. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with maple trees and weathered mailboxes, the kind of place where children rode bikes until the streetlights came on and neighbors waved from porches. The house itself had been vacant for nearly 8 years. A 2-story structure built in the 1930s with cracked paint and ivy crawling up one side. It needed work, sure, but it had character, charm, a good foundation, or so they thought. From the moment Amanda walked inside, something felt off. Not wrong, not threatening, just off. She couldn't quite place it at first. It was Derek who noticed it first. As they explored the living room, he stopped mid-sentence. "Can you hear anything?" he asked. Amanda paused. It took her a moment to understand what he meant. No footsteps, no creaking floorboards, no distant cars, not even the faint ticking of their own shoes on wood. It was like stepping into a vacuum. Their voices felt swallowed up as soon as they spoke. Even clapping their hands made a dull, almost deadened sound, as if something was absorbing every bit of vibration. Derek shrugged it off. Old insulation, maybe. Amanda tried to smile, but the quiet felt unnatural, not peaceful, just empty. Still, they signed the papers a week later. The price was too good to pass up, and the house had potential. Amanda saw it as a project, something they could transform together, a blank canvas. They moved in by the end of the month. The silence was immediate and inescapable. It wasn't just quiet, it was complete. You couldn't hear the street. You couldn't hear birds. On windy days, trees outside would bend and sway, but inside, it was as if nothing was happening. Amanda would test it sometimes. She'd stand at the window, watch a mail truck drive by, and hear nothing, not even the rumble of tires. Just an eerie stillness pressing against the glass. The strangest part? The silence wasn't uniform. It wasn't just muffled sound. It was as though sound was actively being erased. Rooms didn't echo. Footsteps vanished as soon as they were made. If you dropped a spoon on the kitchen tile, it didn't ring. It just stopped. Amanda tried to research it. Maybe there were materials in the walls that could explain it. Some old soundproofing method? But she found nothing in the paperwork. Derek insisted it was just part of the house's quirk. He tried to joke about it. But at night, when Amanda lay awake, she started to realize that something deeper was wrong. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of life. The first radar warning came when they started renovating. Derek was working in the dining room, pulling up sections of the warped floor. Amanda was sorting tools nearby when she heard him call out, "Hey, come look at this." Beneath the old boards, they found a narrow, square cavity, like a trench carved into foundation, no more than a few feet deep. Etched into the concrete were lines. Symbols, words in a language neither of them recognized. It wasn't graffiti. It was precise, deliberate. Some of it looked ancient. Others looked newer, as if someone had returned again and again to add more. Amanda knelt down to look closer. She didn't touch it, but she said she felt something like standing near an old, forgotten place where terrible things had happened. Derek covered it up. "Probably just some weird decorative thing," he said, nailing down new boards. Amanda didn't push it, but she noticed that after that day, he became quieter, not just in volume, but in presence, distracted, unsettled. In the weeks that followed, Amanda began waking up gasping for air. It always happened the same way. She'd be trapped in darkness, chest tight, arms pinned, the feeling of pressure all around her, as if she'd been buried beneath heavy earth. In the dream, she'd scream, but no sound came out, not even inside her own head. She told Derek, who confessed he hadn't been sleeping either. He'd been hearing something. Not every night, but often. Footsteps, just beyond the door, sometimes above the ceiling. Slow, steady, pacing footsteps. Always when the house should have been still. He'd get up, open the door, look around. Nothing, and the silence would return like a blanket thrown over his ears. They began keeping a light on in the hallway. Amanda started avoiding the dining room entirely. One afternoon, Amanda invited her sister over. Rachel was the kind of person who filled a room, talkative, bubbly, full of energy. But the moment she stepped inside, her voice dropped. She looked around, blinking. "Is it always this quiet in here?" Amanda nodded. They sat in the living room, drinking coffee, trying to talk. But every word seemed to land with a thud. Rachel kept looking over her shoulder, like she was waiting for someone to interrupt them. She didn't stay long. As she left, she hesitated at the door. "You guys should get this place checked out," she said. "I don't know. It just doesn't feel right." Amanda laughed it off. But after Rachel left, the house felt even more still, like it was listening. 3 months in, Amanda and Derek's baby was born. They brought little Emily home from the hospital on a rainy Thursday. For a few days, it felt like things had improved. The joy of new life, the distraction of parenthood, the rhythm of feeding and changing and lullabies. They installed a baby monitor in the nursery. It was an older model, audio only. The house still refused to carry sound, so the monitor helped them stay alert. The silence became a sort of curse. Amanda would walk into the nursery and see Emily crying. Face red, fists clenched, but hear nothing until she was standing inches away. It unnerved her. Then one night, the monitor crackled. Amanda sat up in bed, confused. She hadn't heard anything from it in days, not even static. Then came a whisper. Not Emily's cries, not baby sounds. Words, low, mumbled, unfamiliar. Amanda froze. Derek sat up beside her, confused. They leaned in. The whispering continued. No clear sentences, just fragments. Some in English, some not. Amanda picked up the monitor and stood in the hallway. She crept toward the nursery, heart pounding. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. Emily was asleep in her crib, alone. The whispering stopped. Amanda checked the monitor. It was silent again. The next morning, they packed their things. No long discussions. No second guessing. They left half their furniture, took what they could fit in the car, and never looked back. Later, Amanda tried to research the history of the house. It wasn't easy. There were no listings before 1974. Property records had gaps. But she eventually found something buried in an old city archive. The house had once been part of a private property owned by a man known only by his initials, a wealthy recluse who claimed to be conducting sound experiments in the mid-20th century. Neighbors, according to a scanned newspaper clipping, had complained of missing pets, of visitors who entered but were never seen again. The house had, for a brief time in the 1950s, been shut down and seized by local authorities. But no official reason was ever recorded. There were rumors, passed around by old locals, that the house had been used for something else entirely, a place where voices were never meant to be heard. Amanda and Derek never returned. They moved across the country, started fresh, and never spoke of the house again, not even to their daughter. But Amanda still keeps the baby monitor in a box at the back of her closet. Sometimes when she's alone, she turns it on, just to see if anything is still listening. It started as a joke, a group of teenagers on a late summer hike, wandering too far off the beaten path, found something they never expected to see in the middle of a forest. A mirror, not a piece of glass, not a broken shard reflecting sunlight from the underbrush, but a full-length mirror, nearly 7 feet tall, propped up against the trunk of an old pine tree, deep within the trees of Red Ash Preserve. It had no frame, no stand, just a long stretch of silvered glass, leaning as if someone had carefully positioned it there and left without a trace. At first, they laughed. Of course they did. They were 17, maybe 18, full of nerves and too much energy. It was strange, sure, but also funny in that way that only teenagers find funny. It was something to talk about, something to post about later. They took turns standing in front of it, pulling faces, posing with arms outstretched like explorers. One of them, a boy named Evan, pretended to talk to his own reflection like it was a ghost. Another, Jenna, said it reminded her of something from a fairy tale, the kind of thing you'd stumble on just before the story changes. They stayed for a while, longer than they planned. By the time they left, the sun was beginning to dip low behind the trees. None of them realized it then, but something shifted the moment they found that mirror. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling fan in his bedroom, blinking slowly, waiting for the feeling to pass. The stillness, the strange tension under his skin. It wasn't fear, not exactly, just a sense of being watched. Not from the window, not from the closet, from inside, like something had been stirred awake and had nowhere to go. The mirror came back to him, again and again. He remembered how it felt to stand in front of it, how strange his own reflection had looked, not off, not distorted, but too real, like it had been waiting for him to arrive. By morning, his eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept at all. At school, he didn't mention it, but he wasn't alone. Jenna had seen something. She didn't say anything at first. How could she? She wasn't even sure it had happened. But when she stood in front of the mirror, joking with the others, she glanced over her shoulder and caught a glimpse of something else. It wasn't one of her friends. It wasn't a trick of the trees. It was something else standing behind her, just outside the edges of the reflection. She turned around quickly, heart hammering. Nothing, just the woods, just the stillness of late afternoon. She'd laughed it off, tried to keep up the mood, but her stomach had gone cold. That night, she had a dream. She was walking through the forest again, only this time the trees were farther apart, and the mirror wasn't leaning. It was standing on its own, straight up, untouched, waiting. She approached it slowly, hands shaking, and when she looked into it, her reflection didn't move. Over the next few days, things began to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly. Evan stopped showing up to lunch. Jenna stopped answering texts. One of the others, Marcus, started missing class entirely. Those who hadn't gone to the woods noticed. Something was off with the group. The few who knew them well tried to check in, but none of them could explain it. How do you describe a mirror that shouldn't be there? How do you tell someone that your reflection didn't blink when you did? No one wanted to say it out loud. But all of them, Evan, Jenna, Marcus, and a girl named Kaylee, had the same thought. That mirror hadn't been abandoned. It had been placed. Kaylee was the first to admit she'd gone back. She didn't tell the others right away. She just wanted to see if it was real, if it was still there. Part of her hoped it wouldn't be, that it had been some bizarre coincidence, some trick of the light or strange prank left by campers. But when she returned, alone, the mirror hadn't moved, still against the same tree, still spotless, not a speck of dust, not a smudge of dirt. She stood in front of it. This time, she didn't smile. She watched her reflection breathe. She waited, and then she turned and left. She said later that she hadn't slept since. Each of them, in their own way, began unraveling. Evan stopped leaving his room. He told his mother he was sick, that he needed rest. But all he did was stare out the window. His parents thought he was having a breakdown. They booked him a therapist. He never went. Jenna began writing in a notebook she carried everywhere, pages filled with drawings, trees, eyes, the shape of a person she couldn't fully remember. She said that at night, when she looked in the mirror in her bedroom. Her reflection sometimes smiled just a second too late. Marcus dropped out of school altogether. And Kaylee? Kaylee disappeared. It happened on a Sunday. She told her older brother she was going out to meet a friend, but she never came back. Her phone last pinged near Red Ash Preserve. The police organized a search party. Dogs. Volunteers. They found her bike locked to a tree near the edge of the trail. They found footprints. Hers, leading deeper into the woods. And then nothing. No signs of struggle. No torn clothing. No calls or messages sent. Just a trail that led in and never came out. The others, Evan, Jenna, Marcus, were questioned. None of them told the truth. What were they supposed to say? That we all went into the woods and found a mirror that makes you feel like you're being erased from the inside out? So they kept quiet. Kaylee was listed as a missing person. Case still open. Years passed. Evan moved away, changed his name. Jenna stopped drawing. Marcus eventually told someone that he didn't remember any of it, blocked it all out. But even now, they all know that it's still out there. The mirror, somewhere beyond the trees, past the place where trails stop and the land grows unfamiliar. People still hike Red Ash. It's quiet now, peaceful for the most part. But every so often, someone reports something strange. A cold patch of forest, a space where birds stop singing, a glint of something bright through the trees, tall, straight, catching the light in just the right way. And every few years, someone whispers a story about a girl who walked too far into the woods and never came back. Some say it's just a legend now. But the mirror? It was never found. Not shattered. Not stolen. Just gone. Or maybe still waiting. It was just after midnight when Darren accepted the ride request. He'd been driving for hours, weaving to the quieter neighborhoods on the edge of the city, waiting for one last fare before calling it a night. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that only comes after most of the world has gone to sleep. Fewer headlights, fewer sirens, just the hum of the engine and the faint glow of the dashboard. The request came from a few miles away, in an older part of town where the streetlights flickered more often and the sidewalks stayed empty. Nothing unusual about it, at least not at first. The pickup name read L, just a single letter. The destination was listed as to be entered during trip. Darren tapped accept without much thought. He pulled into the address about 8 minutes later. A narrow street, lined with silent houses and overgrown hedges. The kind of place where you'd expect the homes to still have rotary phones and faded screen doors. His GPS insisted he'd arrived, but there was no one in sight. He turned on his interior light, checked his mirrors. Then, without warning, the back door opened. A woman stepped in and closed it softly behind her. Darren turned slightly in his seat, ready to ask for her destination. But before he could speak, she cut in. "Please don't talk," she said. Her voice was calm, low, not unfriendly, but final. Then she added, "Just drive straight ahead." He hesitated, thumb hovering over the app. Normally, he would have insisted on a destination before starting. But something in her tone, something in the way she spoke without pause or uncertainty, made him nod and put the car in gear. They drove in silence. At first, he tried not to think about it. He figured she'd had a rough night. Maybe an argument. Maybe just someone trying to disappear for a while. It wasn't his business. Drivers see all kinds of people. And some just want to be left alone. But after a few blocks, he noticed she kept glancing behind them. Not once or twice, but again and again, her head shifting slightly, her eyes flicking to the rear window like she expected something to appear. She didn't ask about the route, didn't seem to care where they were going, as long as the car kept moving. Every time they slowed down for a stop sign or a red light, she tensed. Darren pretended not to notice. She never gave an address, just instructions. Left at the light. Keep going past the gas station. Don't stop. Her voice stayed even. Not hurried, not afraid, just steady. After 15 minutes, they were far outside the neighborhoods Darren usually serviced. The buildings grew farther apart, replaced by empty storefronts and stretches of road with no signage. His GPS had long since rerouted itself to a blinking blue, moving through blank space. Then she spoke again. "There's a lot ahead. You can drop me off there." He glanced at the road. A vast, empty parking lot stretched out to the left, attached to what had once been a shopping plaza. Now the windows were black, the signs removed. The lot itself had weeds creeping through cracks. He pulled in slowly. As he reached the far edge of the lot, he eased to a stop. He waited for her to speak. She didn't. He turned to say something, anything, but when he looked back, the seat behind him was empty. At first, he didn't move. He stared at the back seat, his hands frozen on the steering wheel. No sound, no door opening, no movement. The car was locked, all the windows up. He leaned into the space behind him, heart pounding. Checked the floor. The opposite door. Nothing. He got out, walked around the car, opened the back door himself. The seat was cold. No indent where someone had been sitting. No sign anyone had ever been there at all. For a moment, Darren stood in the middle of that lot, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. But when he checked the app, the trip had been marked complete. He'd been paid, time stamped, logged, just no passenger name, and no history of a ride request. The record was gone. Later that night, after returning home, he couldn't sleep. He kept checking the app, refreshing the trip history. Nothing. The ride had vanished from the log entirely. His earnings were still there. The payout had been processed. But the name, the route, the time, gone. He pulled up his dash cam footage. He had a camera installed front and rear, required by the city's rideshare regulations. He played the clip from that timestamp, watched himself pull up to the address, watched the car idle. Then he watched the back door open and no one entered. Just an open door, slowly closing again. He played it back twice, 3 times. Each time the same thing. The car stops. The door opens. Nothing crosses the frame. The door shuts. He checked the interior camera. It showed him turning slightly to speak, then turning back, putting the car in gear, driving off, like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. He scrubbed through the rest of the footage. He could be seen responding to directions, nodding, once, even answering, okay, aloud, but there was no voice, no figure beside him, only him, driving alone through the night. The next morning, he called a support line for the rideshare company. They confirmed the payment had been processed, but they had no record of the ride, no rider named L, no trip request from that address, no trace in their system. The operator on the phone told him it might have been a glitch, that maybe someone had paid him through a direct cashless tip, or that a prior ride had been delayed and accidentally logged. Darren knew that wasn't true. He'd pick someone up. He remembered her voice. Over the next few days, he stayed off the app. He told a friend about what had happened. Just one. The friend, another driver, raised an eyebrow and said, "You ever hear about the old Gray Bridge pickup?" Darren hadn't. The friend told him there's a local story about a woman who appears at the edge of that neighborhood, always late at night. She flags down cars. Sometimes they stop. Sometimes they don't. When they do, she gives directions to strange places, always without giving her name, always without conversation, and she always disappears before the trip ends. The stories vary. Some say she was a hitchhiker. Others say she's looking for someone. Others say nothing at all, just that drivers feel cold after dropping her off, cold in their chests, like something was taken from them. They didn't notice at first. Darren didn't believe in legends, but he kept thinking about that moment in the parking lot when he looked into the rearview mirror and saw nothing. Not a shadow, not a blur, not even the faintest suggestion that someone had ever been there. Weeks passed. He returned to driving eventually, but he never accepted requests without a full name again. He never picked up passengers from that part of town. And every time he looked into his rearview mirror, he took a moment longer than before, just to make sure it was still empty. Samantha started working in the building in early spring. It was a quiet space, 3 floors, red brick, tucked between a post office and a bakery that never seemed to open. The kind of structure that felt out of time, like it had been left untouched for years and was now being slowly brought back to life by tenants looking for affordable rent. Her office was on the 2nd floor, tucked at the end of a narrow hallway. It wasn't much, just a desk, a chair, some bookshelves she never filled. A single window looked out over the alley. The walls were scuffed. The lights sometimes flickered when the microwave ran, but it was hers. She worked as a freelance researcher. Most days, she kept odd hours, sometimes starting early, sometimes staying well into the night, depending on deadlines and inspiration. She liked the quiet. She liked that nobody bothered her, at least not first. It began on a Wednesday. She was working late, around 11:30 p.m., proofreading transcripts, when she heard it, faint giggles coming from the floor below. She paused, straightened up in her chair, and waited. More laughter, high-pitched, happy. Children. She smiled. It was strange to hear kids that late, but maybe the daycare ran overnight? Some urban centers did that now, for hospital workers, overnight staff. It made sense, she thought. Maybe the daycare beneath her was just one of those. She went back to work. The next night, it happened again. Laughter, then singing, then what sounded like a bouncing ball. The rhythms were unmistakable. Children at play, little footsteps running and stopping, the sharp scuffle of sneakers on tile. She glanced at the clock, 1:17 a.m. That gave her pause. Even overnight care centers usually had quiet hours by then. She walked out into the hallway, leaned over the railing that looked down the stairwell. The lower level was cloaked in darkness. No lights, no movement, but the sound was still there. Just barely. A song maybe? Something repetitive. Words she couldn't make out. Then a soft thud. Then silence. The following morning, she stopped the landlord in the hallway. He was an older man, gruff but polite, always wearing the same tan jacket, regardless of weather. She asked him about the daycare. "You mean below you?" he said. She nodded. "There's no daycare," he replied. She blinked. "I heard kids." He shook his head. "Hasn't been a daycare in this building for 15 years. Samantha frowned. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said. "Used to be called Bright Steps, I think. Shut down after some licensing issue. No one's used that floor since. It's just storage now." She didn't argue, but she didn't forget either. That night, she stayed late again. This time, deliberately. She waited, staring at her laptop screen, not really working, just listening. At 12:09 a.m., the noises returned. This time, there's crying. Not loud, not panicked, just quiet sobbing, like a child who didn't want to be alone. She stood from her chair and walked carefully to the stairwell, descended slowly. Her hand brushed the metal railing. With each step, the sound grew fainter. By the time she reached the bottom floor, the crying had stopped. She pushed the door open to what had once been the daycare. The air was cold. The room stretched out before her, empty, dark, the windows covered in dust. Chairs stacked in the corner. A few overturned tables. A plastic rocking horse missing an eye. She walked in slowly. Her footsteps echoed. No voices. No music. No children. But something felt wrong. Off. Not in a loud way. Just enough to make her pause. She turned and went back upstairs. The next morning, she found the first drawing. It was under her desk, on the floor where she usually put her feet, drawn in crayon, red and blue lines crossing each other in jagged patterns. At first, she thought it was a leftover from a past tenant. Maybe it had slid under the desk somehow, but it was fresh. The paper was crisp. No dust, no folding. She picked it up and turned it over. Nothing on the back. She threw it away. She didn't sleep well that night. The sounds continued. Some nights it was laughter. Other nights, crying. Once, she thought she heard a lullaby, sung in a slow, drawn-out voice. She began to dread staying late. But deadlines loomed, and the work piled up, so she stayed. One evening, while organizing files, she found a second drawing. This time, it had been slid into the pages of her notebook. A childlike figure, drawn in black crayon, standing in a doorway. Behind it, in red, were more figures. Smaller, some with stick arms raised. She stared at it for a long time, then slipped it into a drawer and locked it. A few days later, she brought it up to a coworker who worked down the hall. He gave a small laugh, said he'd heard odd things once or twice, but assumed it was the pipes or the building settling. "But a daycare?" he said. "I thought that place was condemned." She asked what he meant. He shrugged. Heard it from a male guy. Said the old daycare had shut down after a fire. Nothing huge, but it was enough to scare away the owner. He moved out, never reopened. Samantha hadn't heard that version of the story. She did a quick search online. No mention of a fire. No record of the daycare, either. Just a listing in an old business directory, long since archived. That weekend, she avoided the office altogether. When she returned Monday morning, there were 3 more drawings waiting on her desk, all crayon, all strange. One showed a figure in a corner, eyes too large for its head. Another showed a room with windows scratched out in black. The last showed what looked like stairs, spiraling downward into something gray. She threw them all away. But that night, she checked the lock on her office door 3 times before leaving. She tried working from home, but she couldn't focus. She kept hearing faint echoes when she closed her eyes. Children, laughter, crying. She unplugged her computer and moved it to her kitchen table. But something followed. Not noise, just the feeling that something had come back with her. She returned to the office a week later, determined to act normal. That's when she found the drawing taped to the underside of her chair. It was a hand, small, red, reaching upward. She went downstairs one final time. The basement was darker than she remembered. The overhead lights didn't come on. She walked through the empty space, tracing the edges of the old daycare, the faint outlines of where cubbies had once stood, the faded paint of alphabet letters on the far wall. She stood in the center of the room, listening, and then she heard it. Not laughter, not crying, just one voice. Close, almost behind her. It whispered a single word. Stay. She left the building before sunrise, told the landlord she wouldn't be renewing her lease. He didn't ask why. She didn't tell him. But even weeks later, when she worked from cafes or borrowed spaces, she sometimes found crayon marks on her papers. Once, she reached into her bag and pulled out a drawing she didn't remember packing. A child smiling, drawn in blue. The words, "Miss you," scrawled underneath. She never returned to that building. But the daycare below, whatever it had been, never truly let her go. Some days, she still hears the laughter. And every so often, when the world is very quiet, she thinks she hears tiny footsteps just beneath her floor. Ethan Wallace had never been the kind of writer who worked well in the city. The noise, the people, the notifications, it all stacked on top of each other until his mind felt choked. For years, he told himself he could push through it, but the pages stayed blank. The ideas came in fragments, never whole, and they faded before he could pin them down. So, in the winter of his 39th year, he did something drastic. He rented a cabin. Not a quaint cottage tucked near a main road or a ski lodge with hot cocoa on demand. This was deep country, way out in the northern forest near the Canadian border, a place you had to find using paper maps, not GPS. The roads were mostly dirt, now frozen hard with ice and crusted snow. He'd found it through a listing on a minimalist website. Remote, quiet, long-term rentals welcome, winterized, with stove. The photos showed a log structure with steep angles and a long porch. Trees in every direction. No neighbors. No cell signal. Perfect. He paid for 2 months up front. The first few days were exactly what he needed. He woke early, made coffee, chopped firewood, and sat at his old typewriter until noon. He wrote in long stretches, stream of consciousness, almost dreamlike. He felt as if something had finally clicked open inside him. The forest air cleared his thoughts. By the fourth morning, he had 37 pages, his best start in years. He'd even stopped counting the days. There was no traffic, no updates, no noise. Just wind, the creak of trees, and the slow crackle of fire, until he noticed a man. It was on the 6th morning. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a thick flannel coat, coffee mug steaming in one hand. He looked out toward the tree line, and there he was, a man, standing, far back between the trees, maybe 60 yards out. Still, no movement, no gesture. Ethan stared for a while, unsure if he was really seeing someone. The woods were thick with shadows, and the snow was beginning to fall again. Maybe it was just a tree stump or some jagged branch playing tricks on his eyes. He stepped back inside. Didn't think much of it. But the next morning, the figure was closer. This time, maybe 50 yards from the porch. Still not moving. Still facing him. No detail. Just a human shape. Arms at his sides. No hat. No visible coat. Just a dark outline against the white of the snow. Ethan felt the first trace of discomfort. He called out, a cautious greeting echoing into the trees. Nothing came back. He squinted, hoping to see a clearer shape. But the wind picked up, and the figure seemed to blur behind the movement of the branches. He went back inside, tried to write, got nothing done. On the third day, he brought binoculars. He waited until the light came through the trees, stepped outside, and lifted the lenses to his eyes. And there he was again, closer now, maybe 30 yards. Still no footprints. Still motionless. And this time, Ethan was certain the man was facing the cabin, not in a casual way, not like someone who had wandered past and paused. This was direct, intentional. like he had been there a long time. He put the binoculars down, walked inside, and locked the door. He called the sheriff's office that afternoon. The signal was weak, and the voice on the other end was difficult to hear, but he explained what he'd seen. The woman on the phone listened, then said she'd send someone out in the morning. Ethan barely slept that night. Every creak of the cabin set his nerves on edge. Every flicker of the fire seemed to stretch shadows longer than they should be. He didn't look out the window. He didn't want to see if the figure had come even closer. The sheriff arrived mid-morning, a tall man with tired eyes and a polite manner. He introduced himself as Deputy Kent. Together, they walked the perimeter. No footprints. No disturbance in the snow. The trees were still. The area quiet. Ethan pointed to where the man had stood. Deputy Kent nodded, walked out to the spot, scanned the woods, then turned back. "You're the only one up here right now," he said. "Only tracks out here are yours and mine." Ethan wanted to press, to explain again just how real it had looked, but something about the deputy's tone made him hesitate. The lawman gave a short nod, said to call again if anything changed, and left. Ethan stood on the porch a long time after his truck disappeared. He didn't want to go back inside. That night, the wind howled louder than usual. The trees groaned under the weight of snow. Ethan tried to sleep, but he kept seeing that shape behind his eyelids. When he opened them, he found himself staring at the window, heart racing. Once, he swore he heard someone walking on the porch, but when he worked up the courage to look, there was nothing there. He stayed up until dawn. The next day, the figure was gone. No sign of it in the woods. Just endless white, broken by narrow, bare trees. Ethan tried to convince himself it was over. Maybe it had been someone passing through. A hunter, a lost hiker. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe he'd imagined it. But that didn't explain the feeling in his stomach. It didn't explain why he checked every room before going to bed. It didn't explain why he left the lights on all night. On the 11th night, something changed. Ethan was writing again, lost in his work. The typewriter clicked softly in the quiet. He paused a stretch, stood, walked to the window, and froze. The figure was no longer outside. He was inside the cabin, standing at the far end of the living room. No sound, no motion, just standing. Ethan tried to move. His muscles refused. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. He could only watch. The man didn't walk forward. He didn't move at all, but his presence filled the room like a weight pressing in from every direction. Ethan felt something shift. The air around him seemed distant, like he was watching his own body from far away. Then everything went black. He woke up in snow, face cold, hands numb. He was outside, flat on his back, half buried. The sky above him was gray, snow still falling in soft waves. He pushed himself up, groggy, confused. The cabin door stood wide open behind him. Inside, the fire had gone out. Everything was still. He stood, trembling, and walked slowly back inside. No sign of the man. No sign of a struggle. Everything exactly where he left it, except the typewriter. It was gone. He packed that morning, threw everything into the truck without organizing. He didn't call the sheriff. He didn't try to explain. He just left. The roads were icy, nearly impassable in places, but he kept driving. Didn't stop until the cabin was hours behind him. Weeks later, he received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was his typewriter, and a single page, typed, centered, with no heading or explanation. It read, "You saw him. Now you don't forget him." He burned the page in his sink, but he kept the typewriter, because ever since that winter, Ethan's writing had changed. He no longer struggled for words. They came easily now, and every story he wrote began with a man standing in the woods,